Hello and welcome to Evo India. Now, have you ever owned or wanted to own a Meteor 350 or a Classic 350 but for always on the fence because it's just a little too laid back, not as engaging as you want it to be, and there wasn't really anything else in the market that really tickled your fancy? Well, now Royal Enfield claims there is in the form of this Hunter 350, and we're here in Thailand to put exactly that to the test. Whether this actually is that much more engaging, that much more sportier of a package, but with that same Royal Enfield DNA. Welcome to our first ride review of the Hunter 350. Now, if you like this video, do give us a thumbs up, share this video with like-minded enthusiasts, and click on that bell icon to stay notified on all things thrill of riding. Alright, now let's talk about the design of this motorcycle, because frankly there's a lot going on here, and at first glance this is really unlike anything we have seen from Royal Enfield in the last few years. But at the same time, it still screams Royal Enfield. There's just something when you look at it that you know it is a Royal Enfield. Maybe it has something to do with this nice round headlight up front. Now, in terms of styling, this is a typical roadster bike, but it has some scrambler cues here and there. And for me personally, I also see a lot of similarity to a certain Brit. Now, which one, that you tell me in the comment section below. But let's continue with the design. You have these nice fork gaiters that add a nice muscular scramblerish stance. And right above the headlight unit, you have this instrument cluster. Now, this is the same setup as the Meteor and the Scram, but instead of those, this has a black inlay. And the dial you see next to it is the tripper navigation module, which of course is an optional extra. Behind that, you have this nice wide handlebar, which offers quite good leverage when you're out riding. And right behind that is this nice well-sculpted tank. Now, this tank holds up to 14 liters of fuel, and that should be good to get you a good amount of distance from where you start. Moving behind, you have this nice, almost a flat bench-like seat, which looks like a scrambler to an extent. You have this nice scoop for the rider, and the pillion seat is ever so slightly raised. Now, this seat setup, frankly, for my weight, didn't really work for me because I sank into it quite soon after starting the ride, so I was with a sore bum. But as is in typical Royal Enfield fashion, you have an entire GMA catalogue that is bespoke to this Hunter 350, of which aftermarket seats are a part of that catalogue, and I'm pretty sure you'll find something that will suit your taste better. Now, behind you have this split grab rail setup with your LED turn signals and your brake light indicator. And then there's the rear fender. Now, this doesn't look all that nice, and especially that rear reflector hanging off all the way down, that's not really pleasing to the eye. But then again, Royal Enfield has a solution for that as well. They offer a tail tidy kit as part of their GMA, and that consolidates this entire rear end to just here. And that frankly looks quite nice. Now, this is the same engine as the Classic and the Meteor, but as you may have noticed that the exhaust design is completely different. That exhaust has been designed and is slightly upswept to go better with this entire look of the bike, and honestly that really does look pretty nice. Now, this here is the Meteor variant, and there are many color schemes to choose from. There is also a base variant which gets two color schemes to choose from. More on the base variant a little later in this video. But what do you think of the styling of this Hunter 350? Let us know in the comment section down below. Alright, so now with the design bits out of the way, let's move to the next big thing that is all new for this Hunter 350, and that has to be its chassis setup. Now, the really observant amongst you would have noticed that the wheels look considerably smaller than that on the Meteor or the Classic, and that is because these are 17-inch wheels, and 17-inch wheels usually ideate to a great road bike, and that is exactly what this is. This 17-inch wheel setup has endowed the bike with agility that is previously unheard of. Trust me, the first time I sat on this bike and the first few kilometers were a little baffling, you know, like I had to reset myself and reacquaint myself with riding this bike because it's unlike any other Royal Enfield. It just changes direction so fast. It's almost like a 150 or a 180cc bike, and the entire bike in that regard is much more compact than a Classic or a Meteor 350, and that will definitely bode well to get smaller riders, younger riders, or those who are surely intimidated by the dimensions of the Classic or the Meteor, more comfortable with a bike like this. The other next change is the chassis, the main frame of this bike. Now gone is the double cradle frame. This is the twin down tube frame, but it doesn't have the cradle anymore, and that in combination with a bunch of other bits and bobs, and especially those wheels, has resulted in a massive weight reduction. This here tips the scales at around 181 kilos wet. That makes it well over 10 kilos lighter than the Meteor or the Classic, and that definitely shows. Now 181 kilos is still hefty, but the way this bike handles, the way this bike rides, it hides its weight pretty well. The rake is also sharper than it would be on the Classic and the Meteor, and that definitely helps in handling. The suspension setup, you have a 41mm fork setup up front and twin shocks at the rear. Now the suspension setup works fairly well. The roads in Bangkok where we are riding, they are pretty good through and through, not really any potholes or bumps, and the speed breakers also are very well thought out. You don't really face any massive thuds or bumps, so that we can properly road test when we get the bike back in India. But on the whole, the chassis setup seems fine. My only grouse with this, and this is when you come to riding it a little harder and a little faster, is that the rear is a little too stiff and the front is on the softer side. And this combination isn't working really well for when you want to really have a good time in the twisties. I'm not saying it's bad, but maybe, just maybe, playing around with the preload settings a little might help in this. But I would like if the coils on the rear were slightly softer sprung. Now, to prove just how much Royal Enfield has worked on the chassis capability of this motorcycle, they took us out to a go-kart track. Yes, you heard that right. Royal Enfield actually included a few laps as a part of the first ride experience for this Hunter 350, and I must say it performed quite well. Scraping pegs left to right and just going and having an all-out fun time at the track is something I really never expected I'd say about a Royal Enfield. In terms of brakes, you have a similar setup as that on the Classic and the Meteor, and my same complaint carries forward here as well. The brakes do a good job of slowing you down, but there's not enough initial bite, which means you really need to grab a handful of the front lever to really get that initial braking going. But apart from that, this new chassis setup is really working in Royal Enfield's favor, and I really foresee more people entering the Royal Enfield brand thanks to this bike. So now this entire combination, with the fact that this is an 800mm saddle height, will really bode well for smaller riders and taller riders alike, and that should help bring in people from various different genres of motorcycling into the Royal Enfield brand, and I'm pretty sure that's going to work well for Royal Enfield. Now we've covered the design, we've covered the fact that this has a solid chassis setup for a good urban street bike. Now what about the engine? This is the same beloved J-Series platform engine, and this is the third bike. The Hunter 350 is the third bike to receive this engine. Now Royal Enfield has left this engine untouched. Like they said, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, and it's a good job they've done that. But one small little change they have done, not to the engine, but it's to the fueling. The throttle response has been made slightly sharper, and you do actually feel that, especially in the low to mid end of the speedometer. You feel that this thing goes just a little faster. Now this might be in my head, but I actually do feel that this feels a little peppier off the line, and especially when you're cutting through traffic, and that is something you can do very easily with this nimble agile bike. You do feel like this has a little more grunt. No power figures have changed, you still get the same 20.1 bhp and 27 Nm of torque. The gearing, the gearbox, everything is identical, so you still have that same slick 5-speed gearbox, the same clutch action, and everything is the same. It's just this fueling that has been done, but that does make it actually feel significantly different. And this is also down to the fact that this bike weighs a lot less. Now in terms of cruising, The same applies here as well. 80 to 90 kilometers per hour is the comfortable cruising speed. Anything beyond that and you're asking for vibrations and stuff like that. Even at 80-90, these mirrors do vibrate ever so slightly, but this can be fixed with a quick aftermarket mirror setup, and Royal Enfield will provide them to you from the GMA catalog. So there is that. Right, now let's get down to the variants that you can get on this bike. The one I'm sitting on right now is the Metro variant of the Hunter 350, which is the premium top-end variant. And because it's the top-end variant, it gets alloy wheels at both ends with fatter tires on them. The front is a 110 section tire and the rear is a 140 section tire, and these tires have been developed specifically in partnership with Seat. Because it is a top-end variant, it also gets disc brakes at both ends. Now, because of that, you also get dual channel ABS. Now, coming down to the Retro variant, which is the base, the entry level, you get spoked wheels at both ends, which are with a tube, not tubeless, and the dimensions are also slightly different. There are narrower sections, the front being 100 and the rear being a 120 section. Even the color schemes, they aren't as posh as the ones on this. And the most important thing that the Retro variant doesn't get over the Metro variant is a rear disc, which means that it doesn't get dual channel ABS as well. It has to make do with a single channel ABS unit. Now, apart from the variants, as is in typical Royal Enfield fashion, you also have an entire plethora of bespoke GMA, that is genuine motorcycle accessories. Now that includes different indicators, different grips, maybe a different bar, different seats, different rear view mirrors, and a whole bunch of other stuff which you can go and check out on the GMA website. Alright, now it's time to sum up the Royal Enfield Hunter 350. In my opinion, this is an extremely likable motorcycle, and this motorcycle is going to be responsible for bringing a lot of non-Royal Enfield people into the Royal Enfield group. This is going to convince a lot of younger riders, a lot of riders who were otherwise intimidated of riding something like a Classic or a Meteor just because of its heft. It's going to convince them that no, Royal Enfield can do something different, and they have. This is a sportier, more engaging version of the Classic and the Meteor, and I really like this bike for that. And the chinks in its armor aren't that major that I would go against recommending it to you. But at the end of the day, it all boils down to pricing. Now, as of filming this video, we don't know the prices yet, but by the time you're watching it, the prices will be out. And if Royal Enfield has managed to price it between 1.5 and 1.8 lakhs for both variants, the Retro to the Metro, I feel that'll be a stellar price for this bike. What do you think of the Hunter 350? Let us know in the comment section down below.